Hello, it's Michael Watts here. I thought I'd do a quick introduction before this wonderful interview with British fingerstyle legend Martin Simpson. First of all, there was a slight tech hiccup right at the beginning. Just as I was about to start, I got a text message, obviously Instagram Live happens on your phone. So just as I was starting, I got a text asking, what time are you starting? The irony was not lost on me. It did make the video a little juddery for the first 30 seconds or so, but I've now edited that out. Also, for those of you with a more delicate sensibility, Martin does say fuck a couple of times. I'm fine with that. I hope you are too. Anyway, it's an hour of wisdom and just the most beautiful storytelling from the man himself, Mr. Martin Simpson.
Now that we're connected, I can lean back in my chair, I think.
That's entirely the idea.
Good, good. Nice to see you.
And you. Really, really great. Thank you so much for your time this evening. It's always a joy to talk to you, and especially about a subject that I know is very dear to both our hearts, and that is the world of the handmade guitar. Now, you see, I had planned a bit of an introduction. If you don't mind, I'll carry on with that.
Please do.
Simply because I've been nursing a theory for the past 5 years or so, that you, as a player and as a person, have been at the absolute ground zero epicenter of the world of the handmade guitar, simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic, which I think is quite a feat.
Well, before this, I started to get, I've been thinking about it for days since we talked about the idea of doing this. And then I started, actually, what did it was I was listening to the radio and I couldn't remember the name of John Mellencamp's drummer, who I worked with quite a bit. And I thought, no, that's no good. I can't be forgetting things. So I thought, I better go and write down a few names of people. And I started to write a list of people that I met, worked with, have played the guitars, etc., etc. This was about half an hour ago. And the more I wrote, the more ridiculous the grin got, because I was just looking at these people and I went, oh my God, this is outrageous. You know, this is actually an astonishing list of people. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be doing this, because there's a lot of people I'd like to mention and talk about and you know, and link up. That's one of the really interesting about this, is all the links. And
indeed, there are some really quite improbable arms to the family tree.
Really, yeah.
One of my favourite being Cassini guitars out in Cape Town, South Africa, which came directly from the Santa Cruz workshop, Richard Hoover's Santa Cruz workshop, which begat Mark Maingard and which begat Cassini. So if we were to sit down and map this whole thing out, no one would believe us.
Oh, well, I mean, one of the things that I wrote down was Santa Cruz, just Santa Cruz, and then like
yeah, exactly.
Phenomenal number of people, but the interesting thing about it is also the input that they got at the beginning. You know, like my late, well, we should probably be a little bit more chronological about
let's attempt this. I sat down and it occurred to me that next year marks the 20th anniversary of my first luthier made guitar, which was made by the lads out in Brook Guitars in Devon.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Lovely stuff. And I made every mistake possible. I chose the wood on the basis of looks. I didn't want to wait for a spruce top to play in, so I went for cedar. I got a long scale length because I was playing in Dadgad, and I thought that would help. All of these things I've since addressed, except for the flashy woods.
Well, I think one of the things you learn, the more you have to do with guitar makers, is that actually probably the less information you give them, the better.
Yes.
You know, small salient points, but let them have their head. let them be inspired, let them run with it. You know, I think that's
Absolutely.
I think everybody, particularly when they're young, makes the mistake of going, I know exactly what I want. You know,
I didn't have a clue.
You really don't, you know, absolutely. But that's okay.
Martin,
No,
what was your first handmade instrument?
I'll go back a bit before that.
Let's do that.
Because I think it's a good story, you know. My first steel strum guitar was a Harmony Sovereign Jumbo.
Oh.
And I actually own one of those. There's one of those over there, which I inherited from my late father-in-law, Roy Bailey.
Of course.
And, you know, I mean, I got that when I was 14, and it was way bigger than I was. It was huge, you know, and it still is huge, I have to say. I traded that in for a Guild F20, which is a little tiny guitar. This would have been, well, this would have been in 1969, probably. Right. So that's a vintage guitar now, you know. And I traded that in for a Gibson J45.
Nice.
And traded that in at Ivor Morant's for a 0018 Martin.
Ooh.
So those were my steel string guitars that I owned, and then I got my 0018 Martin. By which time, you know, I mean, I was long gone as a guitar player. I was really, really, really on fire. And I did my only gig that I ever did out of the country. The first time I'd ever been out of the country, I went to Algeria, and on the way back, my Martin was stolen.
Oh.
I briefly played an Epiphone Texan, which was a beautiful guitar actually, but you know, it wasn't my guitar. It was something I played for a while, and then I ordered a guitar from Peter Abnett in Rochester in Kent. And Peter was an art teacher who built a lot of different instruments. He built dulcimers and guitars. But the instrument that I saw, which persuaded me that I should have him make me a guitar, was an auto harp. Right?
Oh, wow.
So auto harps being some of the nastiest, worst made instruments you can imagine. He made the most incredibly beautiful auto harp out of fine tone woods. It was extraordinary. It was so beautiful. And I thought, well, if this guy can make an auto harp like that, what could he do with a guitar? And he built me basically a very fancy Indian rosewood OM with a wide flat fingerboard. And that I used that on, well, certainly on the first record that I made, which was late 1975, and then on some other recordings around then. And it was a great guitar, really good. And I had that guitar until I left for the States, which was in the 80s. So I used it a lot. It was very, very lightly built and very fragile, but which is why I didn't take it to the States with me, because I thought it was going to die. You know? but that was my guitar. That was my premier guitar for years. Meanwhile, I met a guy called John Weir, who I don't think is still building, but John made some really excellent guitars. He made two guitars for me, one of which I used a lot on the record, A Cut Above with June Tabor. And the next one he built me was actually, it was a very experimental instrument. It was a maple guitar, and it was very, very light coloured maple. And he made the whole thing in a green sunburst. And it was referred to as either the Snottercaster or the Avocado Burst. And it was actually a very good guitar. It was a great guitar.
That sounds like something Donovan would have.
Oh, please, language, dear boy, language. No, I'm not going there at all. It was a very experimental and very beautiful instrument, but really outrageous. But meanwhile, in 1982, I think, I did a gig in Durham, I suspect.
My hometown.
Well, there you go. Well, after the gig, this little geezer come to the gig, and he said, I knew who he was because I'd actually seen he and his wife play at Scunthorpe Folk Club years before that. And his name was Stefan Sobel.
Oh, yes.
Stefan and Liz used to play in the folk clubs, you know. And then I heard that he wasn't doing that anymore, but he was making some instruments. And the first instruments of his that I was aware of were dulcimers, lap dulcimers. You know, which again, it's an instrument that lots of them are very, very badly made, and you can hardly hear them. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing these instruments which Stefan made, which were really, really loud and really musical. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went to see Stefan after the gig. I stayed with him. He said, come back, have a couple of drinks, you know. So I want to show you a guitar I've made, and I want to know what you think about it. And so, to cut what could be a very long story short, I played this guitar and I looked at it and went, wait a minute, this is completely different from any other acoustic guitar I've played. It is not a flat top guitar. It has, you know, an arch built into it. And I thought, this is profound. This is so strong, this guitar. And you know what happens to me when I play a guitar and I like it is I cease to converse. So sitting on Stefan's sofa playing this guitar, and he's just looking at me and listening, and he said, well, what do you think? I said, I think you're not having it back. And that was my opening line, really, to our relationship as builder and you know, acolyte.
Yes.
The thing about Stefan, and I think this is really, I think it's really an interesting route to take, because Stefan didn't come from a traditional background at all. You know, if you look at the larger world of modern luthiery, there's two sort of major camps. One is those who are ultimately influenced by traditional builders, by Martin, by Gibson, you know. So, and there are, I mean, incredibly wonderful companies who basically don't do anything but that. I mean, a case in point would be Collings, you know. Well, Collings Guitars in Texas basically are one of the companies that kicked C.F. Martin up the arse because they were making Martins better than Martins did, you know. And I think this is a good thing, and I don't think you'd get a lot of argument from Dick Boak, for instance, as to whether that's the truth or not. And Collings, you know, have made guitars which are like Martins, which are like Gibsons, and I have to admire them immensely for that. You know, the recent thing that they did, which was to make this series of instruments under the name Waterloo.
Aren't they lovely?
Well, they are brilliant, genius copies of cheap,
exactly,
era guitars, but they are executed. That, you know, I mean, I was talking to my friend Dave Delar about this. He has a Kalamazoo, I think it's a G11. It's a very cheap guitar, but it's one of the good ones. I mean, it's phenomenal. He can play anything on that thing. You know, it's a really great guitar. But a lot of the guitars that would come out of the factory at the same time were not great guitars.
That's true.
Most of them are bits now, you know. But what Collings have done with their Waterloo line is said, well, let's look at this and let's do it properly. Let's make these quirky old guitars, but let's make them consistent and brilliant, you know. So that's one thing that people have done, and I'll talk about it more as we go along. Stefan's background, his guitar that he played was a C model Martin from the 1930s, an arch top round hole guitar, and he really liked it. He really liked the tone of it. When he first made a guitar, it was an arch top guitar with a floating bridge and a tailpiece. Beautiful, beautiful instrument. And then he went on to make the guitars that I'm associated with, which are the ones with basically the tops are arched. Arched over braces, I think, is the easiest way to describe it.
Yes.
They have so much punch. They have so much signature sound. You know, they're very pianistic indeed. And so he had this, you know, he had this very strange guitar which he played, and then he was repairing things like Portuguese guitars. A lot of Irish musicians were coming in and saying, well, you know, I've got this bouzouki we've got in Turkey or whatever, and I've got this Portuguese guitar, but they all kept falling to bits. So Stefan would be repairing these instruments and weighing them up and going, well, wait a minute, if we did a bit of that and took some of that and did that. So he became one of the first people, actually, along with Peter Abnett in England, to make what are referred to now as Irish bouzoukis, you know.
Yes.
Irish bouzoukis, in fact. But he was one of the first people to do that. And Abnett also. And meanwhile, and this should never be overlooked, at any point, by the way, if you want to stop me.
No, this is exactly what we're here for.
Right, because meanwhile, you know, this is already the early 80s, but in the middle 70s, I'd encountered this character called Roger Bucknall.
Yes.
And Roger Bucknall, if you actually look at the acoustic guitar in England and say, who is the most successful builder of acoustic guitars in England, it would be Roger Bucknall. Because Roger, unlike somebody like Stefan, who's basically a one-man operation, you know, very, very much a one-man operation, Roger's an engineer as well as everything else that he is, a very, very smart man. And he looked at this and he went, well, you know, I could make one-off instruments, or I could actually try and do this in a slightly larger way. And he did, and he was very successful. You know, he's made a lot of instruments, and a lot of very fine instruments. So in the middle 70s, I was in this mad position of being in my very early 20s, having this extraordinary guitar that Peter Abnett had made for me, but being hugely into resonator guitars and things of that nature. And I bought one of the new Dobros that were being made with a spider, you know, bridge and all that. And when I got it home, I was so mortally disappointed in the workmanship of it. And it had never occurred to me that traditional Dobros were just made of thick plywood, you know. And I was actually heartbroken. I thought, where's the charisma in this thing? Where is the beauty? And the only beauty I could see was in the metalwork. So I removed the metalwork, basically, and I gave it to Roger. And I said, Roger, put this in one of your guitars. And he did. And it was an amazing guitar, actually. A really very fine guitar. And it became sort of one of the guitars that I was recognized by was this incredibly fancy, mad dobro that Roger made. So there's a book, I think it's called The Acoustic Guitar by Marianne and somebody Evans, and it was the first fancy coffee table guitar book. And it came out in the 70s. And there's a picture of me playing that guitar. So that was, you know, it became really kind of a signature thing, you know. So, yeah. So
wonderful.
That was kind of my 70s and early 80s was this incredible rush of encountering these people. But then, and this is what's really interesting to me, is along with all that, I find Ralph Bown in York.
Right, yes.
And I mean, it's really hard it's really hard to talk about Ralph without, first of all, just saying Ralph is one of the guys that's had the kind of, if you like, traditional influence. So he can make you a Gibson LO, you know, or he can make you a triple O 45, or he can make you pretty much whatever you want, but it will be a Bown. And I was so taken. I think he's one of the best woodworkers that I've ever seen. His workmanship is incredibly great. And he made me a Cowood baritone guitar.
Oh my word!
I wanted a long scale guitar. This is a very storied instrument, this guitar, actually. He made me it, and it's an incredibly beautiful guitar. It's an extraordinary sounding guitar. The workmanship was ridiculous. And it was one of the instruments that I took with me when I moved to the States.
Right.
So when I first lived in the States, I had I actually had sold the Abnett because I thought it was going to explode because it was so light. Not if I sold it to somebody here, but if I took it on the road in the States. I took the green guitar, the Sobell, and the Bown, and I didn't take the Fylde because, again, it was very lightly built, and I thought, this is not going to do well with extremes of temperature and humidity. So one of the first things that I did, by the way, when I moved back from the States, was get Roger to build me another one.
I think I've seen that one.
It's killer. It's absolutely wonderful. Much better than the first one, actually. So there I am in the States, and Stefan Grossman approached me, who at the time had a label called Guitar Artistry. And, and he asked me to make instrumental records. And I said, well, okay. And he said, British. So the first record that I made was a record of slow airs, basically. And it was those three guitars I used on it. And I think that record and the following one, which was called When I Was on Horseback, they were enormously influential, kind of much to my surprise. In the US, people suddenly were going, whoa, wait a minute, what's all this?
Yeah.
You know. And I was living, when I made those records, I was living in upstate New York, in Ithaca, New York. And of course, what's the thing you do when you move to a new city or a new town? You go and find the guitar shop, don't you?
Oh, yeah, it's the first thing.
Yeah. Well, Ithaca had this shop called the Ithaca Guitar Works, which was run by a guy called Chris Broadwell and Eric Aceto. And Eric Aceto is just an extraordinary luthier, also a great guitar player and fiddle player. So I found myself very happily gravitating towards these people, you know. And bless them, they introduced me to all their buddies. And they were very, very active in creating, I suppose, very cutting edge electroacoustic guitars, really, really cool electroacoustic guitars. And they would go to this thing called the Association of Stringed Instrument Artisans.
Right, yes.
And oh, what's that? And they went, well, come along, you know, come along. And tell you what, come along and play our guitars for us. So off I went to the Association of Stringed Instrument Artisans, which was just, it was like heaven and a party at the same time. I met the most astonishing procession of builders and business people from the music business, and all I wanted to do was play all their guitars. And I'm not being big-headed, but they loved me because my job is to make guitars sound good. So I would play these guitars for them, and they'd go, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, more of that.
Exactly.
So basically everybody said, play this, play this. One of my favourite little anecdotes that came out of this was probably about three Association of Stringed Instrument Artisan annual symposiums in. I met this bloke called Jim Olsen, and
Yes.
and Jim said, I've heard you playing and I really want you to play this new guitar for me. I've just made this. Tell me what you think of this guitar. So I picked this guitar up and I played it, and I thought it was absolutely astonishing. I thought it was beautiful. It's incredibly well made. But the only thing that I could play on it, I kept saying, well, wait a minute, he wants to do this. And eventually I said to him, I said, I can't believe this. All I want to do with this guitar is play James Taylor songs on it. He said, that's James Taylor's guitar. I've just finished it for him.
No.
No, I felt like, ooh, boogie, 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 you know. But it was made for James Taylor, and it was utterly his guitar, even though he never touched it, you know.
Every Olsen I've played has been just delicious. They really are very special.
No, he's great, and he's a guy that has his own aesthetic. Okay, you know, you don't look at an Olsen guitar and go, I wonder who made that.
No.
That's an interesting thing, I think, to think about. You know, when you look at all these different builders, you look at Olsen headstock design, even if it didn't have the, you know, style O in it, the headstock design is
sweet,
very, very much his, you know. So I'm in the States, I'm hanging out with these incredible people, incredible builders, and I've got, you know, my wacky guitars, and people are going, well, you know, try one of these, have one of these, and I'm going, well, and eventually what happened next is that I moved to California, and being in California was even more like being in heaven, because Santa Cruz is the town I moved to. So I found myself in Santa Cruz, and the people that I met were Paul Hostetter, who is the guy who designed the Santa Cruz H guitar.
Yes, indeed.
Based on his Gibson Nick Lucas 13 fret guitar that he'd had for years. Paul's one of those guys who, alas, he's not with us anymore, but he was a repairman, and he worked on everything you can imagine. Everything. The absolute history of musical instruments had gone under his careful cutting and saving and grafting, you know, and just amazing and hugely influential, I think, in lots of ways.
Absolutely.
So I met him, and down the road from him was Rick Turner, and Rick Turner's place in the history of the music business is so long and so cool. He was Ian and Sylvia's backup guitar player for a while. He recorded with a bunch of, you know, folkies in the very early 60s. Ended up in Topanga Canyon when I met him.
Right.
But meanwhile, he'd been in Northern California, and he was one of the people who designed alembic basses and built alembic instruments. He designed the Wall of Sound for the Grateful Dead. You know, how Rick can hear anything, I don't know. But he's just made. Oh, he also, of course, made Lindsey Buckingham's
Exactly. Yeah.
all through the, you know, the massive years of Fleetwood Mac. Just an incredible guy with incredible knowledge, collecting the weirdest instruments and influenced by the weirdest, strangest, non-mainstream instruments. And that's you know, one of the things that I love when you find somebody like that. He was massively influenced by a guitar maker called Bowman, who was late 19th century, and Bowman instruments were very far from flat top guitars. You know, they actually remind me quite a lot of Stefan's instruments, but they had adjustable necks. So you basically a couple of screws and you could alter the pitch of the neck. Really, I mean, incredibly radical things, you know. And there's Rick Turner doing that, and Paul working with the guys from Santa Cruz Guitars. So back to Ralph Bound, right?
Yes.
So I am living in Santa Cruz in a rented house, and I didn't want to live in a rented house because it was just like pouring money down a hole every month, you know. And I found a little house that I wanted to buy, and I thought, how can I possibly afford to buy a house in Santa Cruz in California? And this was way before the IT boom. So in fact, it was possible for me to buy a house at that time.
Right.
But what I did was I remembered that at the NAMM show the previous year, I'd run into Steve Miller of the Steve Miller Band, because I've been demonstrating. I was demonstrating actually a Martin guitar for Dick Boat.
Fantastic.
And I was playing this piece called Broke Down Engine, which is really funky, you know. And when I finished it, I put the guitar down and this guy came hurtling towards me. Big geezer came hurtling towards me, literally put his arms around me, lifted me off the floor and said, "That was fucking great. Wow, who's this?" And somebody said, "Steve Miller." I went, "Oh, great." So we got on like a house on fire, basically. Lots of you know, musical interests in common. And he loved that baritone guitar. And so I called him up and said, "Steve, I want to buy a house. Do you still love that baritone guitar?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And so he bought it from me, and which gave me the money for the down payment on this house. So thank you, Mr. Brown. And I know Steve still got it. But an interesting one here, excuse me, before it went to Steve Miller, a lot of the guys on the West Coast had seen it. And shortly after that, National Guitars and Santa Cruz Guitars both started making baritones, and which I thought was very interesting. So, and I'm not being daft. That's true. That's how it was. All of a sudden, people are going, "Whoa, I want one of those guitars that isn't a bass but sounds amazing, you know, and has a long scale." So,
and how did that idea come across? That original build was Ralph. Yeah,
he liked the idea of experimenting with long scales, you know. There were some people had made bass acoustic guitars. Roger Bucknall being one. He made actually an instrument which was really successful in the hands of Stu Luckley, who was a Geordie musician, and he played the bejesus out of one of Roger's bass guitars. Really made it sound great. You know, and it wasn't a massive guitar, but it had a massive scale length, and it was a very, very cool thing. So people were going, "Well, that's great, but actually, what about going somewhere between, you know, a long scale guitar, 25.5-inch guitar, and, you know, sort of 32 or what scale length of a bass instrument?" And so this, you know, the baritone guitar. And I mean, there are a lot of precedents for it, but mostly in electric guitars in the USA, you know. But it became a thing, and Stefan Sobel still makes what he calls a D guitar, which I
yes,
can't
indeed,
the fact that it's a D guitar, because to me it would be a B flat guitar, because I tune everything down anyway, you know. So it would have to go further than that. So yeah, it was a Bound. It was a Bound idea. It's pretty much based on the size of the instrument was like a Gibson J180. And the headstock, because I really liked it and he'd used it before, was like the old Epiphone pre-war off-center kind of moustache headstock. very beautiful, very tasteful.
Very good looking headstock.
Yeah, so very, very, it was a great guitar. I mean, it really was a great guitar. So, yes, thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Steve.
And your time in the Bay Area, obviously, brought you into contact with a couple of luthiers, Ervin Somogyi, of course.
Indeed. Well,
And
before that, because of Santa Cruz being Santa Cruz,
mm,
the place was, Santa Cruz Guitars was absolutely thriving when I was there.
yes.
Growing all the time. But Santa Cruz Guitars became one of those places where people applied to work because they knew if they were good, they could get really good working for Richard.
Yes, exactly.
And his company became a really vital school, I think, for American luthiery, but not in the sense of it being a school. It was a place where people went to work and they learned everything, and they learned to do it really well, or they didn't get on. You know? And he had just this procession of great builders who went, really did their work, and then in some cases moved, to Hawaii, or in the case of Jeff Traugott, moved just down the road, into an industrial estate. And it's really interesting, the way that in the States there are these little conglomerations, these areas where luthiers, hang, and Santa Cruz being one. Another is San Luis Obispo.
Yes, indeed.
San Luis Obispo is this, funny little seaside town, and you find yourself on an industrial estate, and there's National Guitars and Highlander pickups and Mark Burger, building ukes, and Ernie Balls just over there, and it's exciting. As you can see, I'm in California.
Well, there's little epicenters that have grown into centers of excellence, like Jean Larive's shop, the Santa Cruz shop, and then obviously the idea was taken further with the idea of an apprenticeship with a luthier, which is a very different thing to being part of the production line. This is, you are learning from a master to become a master. This is a Titian and Tintoretto Renaissance kind of vibe. Yeah,
absolutely. That's obviously what Ervin Somogyi has done, bless his heart. He's taken on one person at a time, and I really have treasured meeting all of the people that we're talking about. But I was just thinking, and to my deep chagrin, I cannot remember the name of one of Ervin's apprentices. Was a young Japanese guy.
Michi Matsuda.
No, earlier than that.
Oh, Hiroshi Ogino. Oh, earlier than that.
Yeah.
Chris Morimoto.
No.
I'm running out of Japanese names.
I know. Well, I will find him, and
please do.
Let you have his name. He was actually, I thought he was brilliant, and I had one of his guitars, which I sent back to him for repairs, and the poor guy was murdered in
Taku Sakashita.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was a real shock.
He was such a nice man, such a brilliant builder. I mean, he just was away as far as I was concerned. Man,
Absolutely right. The electrics that he was making were just heartbreaking.
Yeah,
absolutely stunning.
Well, then, so we'll go back to Jeff Traugott and Santa Cruz in a minute, and we'll also go back to Ervin Somogyi. But you mentioning electric guitars, and I've been, kind of saying, well, this person has been traditionally influenced and has stayed with it. And then you find some people who are just away, they're just running with ideas. And Klein.
Oh, come off it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I met Mr. Klein, and I mean, I'd seen Joni Mitchell playing one of his guitars.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And gone, what is this guitar? What does it all mean? You know, I really didn't know what to think of it at all. But the first of his instruments that I ever played was an electric, which was basically it had like a Steinberger neck.
Right, one of the headless ergonomic numbers
down here, and it had a body which was actually reminiscent of one of the least successful Ovation electric guitars.
The breadwinner.
Breadwinner, yeah. But the thing about this Klein guitar, Steve Klein, was that it was brilliant. It was completely comfortable to play, you know. It was so ergonomically correct. And I had one of them, and I would pull it out of its case, and people would go, What? What's that? Why is that? What is it? It really upset people. It was fantastic. People are freaking out. No, it's wrong. No, it isn't wrong. It's an astonishing thing. You know, a beautifully made instrument, incredibly sensible, incredibly comfortable. Yeah, Steve Klein made some amazing stuff.
Yes,
I don't know what he's doing now. I don't know.
They are back building. It's Klein and Kaufman, and they are for many years. I can't speak to this with a huge amount of accuracy, so forgive me, Steve, or anybody else. But I know that he'd gone slightly sort of AWOL for a while, and is now back on the scene. A quick aside: I remember I must have been in my mid-teens. I was on a dial-up modem, and I waited 45 minutes for a JPEG of 3 Klein guitars to download so I could have it.
Yeah, well, quite right too.
It was the sexiest thing I'd ever seen. I was just appalled. You know, it's the shock of the new, isn't it? And we get that decreasingly these days with, I mean, obviously there are visionaries out there, Ervin being one, Michi Matsuda being another, the guy just makes wood melt. Steve Klein was definitely one. Guys like Ulrich Teufel in the electric guitar department. Do you feel that this is being a little watered down? Because I'm seeing the same massively iconoclastic flourishes being used just because they're there now by luthiers who don't necessarily understand the message, the gravitas, what it means.
I think that's absolutely inevitable. That's what's going to happen, because in the same way, you know, that Martin made guitars that people just went, that's what guitars are. And Gibson made guitars that people went, that's what guitars are. And then later, of course, Fender made guitars. And,
yes, indeed.
And everybody and their dog wanted to make guitars that looked like that. And then PRS made guitars, and everybody went, yeah, no, that's it. You know, I think it's truly inevitable, in the same way that in pop music, you know, somebody comes and does something groundbreaking, and all the commercial elements of the music business immediately scramble around to find somebody who can present a watered down version of the groundbreaking, you know, and that's not really, you know, that's the nature of humanity, is that we see something and go, yeah, well, I've got to have one like that.
Oh, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Martin, we don't have a huge amount of time. I'm afraid we're limited to an hour for these chats.
Oh, really? How long have I been talking for?
Well, I thought about 35 seconds, because I've sat here absolutely entranced. But I would like to move on to the subject of this next generation of luthiers, and I know you have been a vocal champion of guitar builders on both sides of the Atlantic. Most recently, you've been working with two British luthiers in particular, Rory Dowling of Taran guitars, and also Rosie Heydenrych, whose work appears on the front cover of your new record.
What? This record here?
That one.
Yes.
And it's to be, look, let's take 2 minutes just to say this is a really great record. I've been listening to it. I've absolutely loved it. I really have. It's got so many songs that I already love. It's got your playing, which I just find wonderful. It's a wonderful piece of work. So congratulations on that front. Now tell us all about someone else.
Thank you. Yeah. That guitar. I'll talk about both of those people individually. Obviously, Rosie Heydenrych was brought to my attention by Terry Oliver, who is my long-time friend, sometime road manager, just lovely man, and he is a massive fan of the guitar. You know, he doesn't play brilliantly. He plays entirely for love, and he sits and he makes a beautiful sound out of guitars. And he came across this woman, Rosie Heydenrych, and he really loved the fact that she was building using English timbers. Yes. Because obviously, you know, in modern luthiery, you're up against some real serious issues with using traditional materials, because a lot of those traditional materials have become endangered species, basically.
Yes, indeed.
Not, I would hasten to add, because of their use in luthiery, but, you know, like people say, oh, well, you know, they made all those Brazilian rosewood guitars. No, actually, what they made was thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of square feet of veneers.
Exactly.
For floors and tables and furniture and things. So anyway, that's a side issue. Rosie was making this guitar, which Terry had ordered, out of bog oak and yew and various other English woods. And I went to see her and came away going, well, okay, this person is one of the best workers in wood that I have ever encountered. And I looked at what she was doing. I looked at the way the inside of her guitars. Both she and Rory Dowling make guitars that when you look inside them, you want to live in there. You just look and you go. Actually, I showed my daughter Kit, my daughter Max, the Dowling guitar, which has got a sound port, and she went, oh, I'd like to live in there. So it's not just guitar players. Rosie just blew me away with her work personship. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And I kept seeing, as she made more instruments, I kept seeing this development. And eventually we talked a lot, you know, and she said, I've made a guitar, I'd really like to send it to you. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, basically it's a cutaway OM, but it's made out of old Brazilian mahogany and I think it's European spruce. It might be Adirondack. I actually can't remember off the top of my head because my brain is going. Anyways, the guitar arrived. Oh, it has a sycamore neck, which is just so beautiful. It's ridiculous. Guitar arrived. I got it out of its case and started to play it. And Kit was upstairs in the room adjacent to this, which is her little snug. And she was sitting there, and I came in with the guitar and put my foot up on the coffee table and started to play, just going, this guitar is fucking amazing, listen to this guitar. And Kit was grinning at me, and the cat was in the room and went, why to Kit, why are you paying attention to this idiot with the guitar? you could be paying attention to me. Hence, the really rather wonderful little. I don't think. Oh yes.
Oh yes, right at the bottom there.
He's going, oi, like that. Oi, right to me, oi. So I basically had that guitar for about 10 days, and I called Rosie up to say, I want this guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, no. She said, I have just had the money put into my account by my Korean customer.
Oh.
I had told him about it, but he has now paid for it, which I was not expecting.
Mm.
And I went, I've got one more set of all that wood. How about if I make you another one? So I said, no, it'll be lovely. Thank you very much. So she is in the process of making it. It should probably arrive just after Christmas, I think.
Very exciting.
I can't talk highly enough about the skill that she has. It's extraordinary. It's amazing. So, I'm back. Rory Dowling.
Rory, yes.
Rory, I've been aware of Rory's work for quite a few years. And initially, when I first saw his guitars, it was very clear that he was very influenced by Stefan Sobel, which is not a bad thing.
Not unfair and not a bad thing. Absolutely right.
No, absolutely not. And he was very, very sensible in terms of bringing his guitars to people's attention. He would send them to somebody and say, look, having arranged in advance to do it, look, I'm sending you this guitar. I want you to try it out and then send it on to so-and-so. And so one of his guitars came before me in that way. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is, absolutely a development on what he was doing before. The next one that came, my friend James Fagan was looking for a really great guitar, and he has a Sobell guitar bouzouki. And I played this guitar and just called James up and said, James, I think I've just found your guitar. So he bought it, and he absolutely loves it, as so he should, because it's brilliant. So Rory and I were getting on, communicating a lot. I really love talking to my friends in the luthiery business. I talk to Stefan a lot. I talk to Roger Bucknall a lot, and because they are the elder generation, and they are very grumpy sometimes, so I refer to them as Waldorf and Statler, the Waldorf and Statler of luthiery.
Brilliant.
So Rory got in touch and he said, could I come and talk to you about guitars? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, I'd really like to look at your instruments. So I said, okay, well, come on, let's do it. So he came down and he spent a day basically, and I showed him all these things, and I showed him my one vintage guitar that I own, which I think this is worth a little sidebar here. When I lived in the States, I would look at a lot of vintage instruments. The ones that I wanted, I absolutely couldn't afford. They were the things like an early 1930s D18.
Oof. Yeah.
Which I met a guy in Lawrence, Kansas, who had 3 of those, and all of them you would slaughter members of your family for. They were just outrageously great instruments. But a lot of the instruments over there have been very badly treated by the weather, by humidity and lack thereof, and heat and cold, and by being thrashed in public,
There's that as well, yeah.
But I found a 1931 0018 12 fret here in England, which has been in England since it was made. It was one of the last 12 ordered. It was ordered by Boozy and Hawkes.
Wow.
Okay, to London in 1932.
Oof.
And I bought it probably 5 years ago now. And it's a just complete life-changing guitar for me. It's just everything that you wished an old guitar would be. It's brilliant. And I showed it to Rory, and Rory just you could see his head just go. And he said, how did they do this? How did they do this? Why is this like it is? And I said, well, I don't know. If I knew, I'd be doing it, you know. But he went away, and he got back in touch, and he said, look, can we work on a guitar together? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he said, the jumping off point is going to be that triple O. And I said, great idea. So why don't you start by making a 12 fret mahogany guitar? But, you know, and he said, is there anything based on the guitars that you've seen that I've made? Is there anything that you would do? And as I said earlier, I don't go, oh, I want exactly this and exactly this, because I think it's a bad idea. When I was in the States, I worked with Dana Bourgeois. And we worked on basically what was based on an old Gibson, a 12 fret with a cutaway, but with the old snake headstock.
Right.
A very, very early 20s design, actually, and one that not a lot of people use. But the strength of it, the quality is that the strings go straight off. Straight up, yeah. Straight across the nut, straight up to the tuning pegs. And I said, Rory, honestly, I think if you could incline your headstocks in that direction a bit. And that's what I did, basically. And he made a guitar and he sent it down and he said, it's not quite right, but tell me what you think. And I said, well, it's not quite right, but it's absolutely on track and it's a great guitar. So he went and he did another one. Same kind of thing. I had exactly the same experience working with PRS guitars. You know, working on, they'd send me a guitar and say, what do you think? I said, well, but, you know, this. Yeah. Just little tiny things like, no, it's not an electric guitar. Why has it got this little tiny skinny neck on it? It doesn't work, you know. And of course, they ended up making great guitars. Rory eventually made a guitar which I used on the last record, which I thought was fantastic. I thought it was absolutely amazing guitar. And then, shortly after he'd made that guitar, I did a guitar workshop. And one of the guys who came on the workshop brought with him the next generation of the guitar that Rory had made for me. And it was an African blackwood guitar with a beautiful bevel to, you know, for your arm, an armrest kind of thing. Sound port in the upper shoulder, which I've never had before, and fan frets. Oof. Now, there's so much about that guitar that was not involved in the guitar that Rory had built for me, all of which I absolutely loved. Using the open tunings that I use, especially, you know, tunings where the bottom string's down to C, you know, that long scale that you get with a fan fret guitar is wonderful. It's so great for intonation. And Rory, like Rosie, his woodwork is completely extraordinary. His aesthetic is amazing. So this new guitar's got burl on it. And I looked at the burl and went, what is this? So, Rory, you've got to tell me, what is this burl? And he said, like, I bought it from the Bentley company. It's L. Burl. There you go. And this is in Bentley guitars. It got me a Rolls Royce one, really, honestly. But no, it's, you know, another thing that really blew me away about the guitar that Rory made is that he said, can I just ask you, what's your favourite colour? And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, he lines the sides of the guitar. They're lined in maple, I believe. Very, very white. And he's recently taken to colouring the maple. So I said, well, I didn't know why he was asking me this. So I said, well, I think Kingfisher blue probably is my favourite colour. So the inner walls of this guitar are Kingfisher blue. And you look in through the sound port and just go, ah! Oh, he's a very naughty man. He really is. The thing is about these builders, you know, all of the people that I've mentioned, from Stefan, Roger and Stefan and Ralph, and everybody, all these people are making fantastic instruments. And as it is in any field, you look at the chronology, and you look at people who are building on other people's work, if you like. It's inevitable, and it's wonderful. And I mean, for me, you know, my guitar playing, you can look back and you can go, well, there's Jonesy and Carthy and Goch and Blind Willie Johnson and Doc Watson, and, you know, just a whole pile of people without whose work I couldn't possibly have come to the flimsy conclusions I've come to. You know?
Oh, I'm not having that.
And it's the same with guitar makers. You look at guitar makers, and they're all paying attention. You know, even somebody like Stefan, who is such a total maverick, he has paid so much attention. He still blows me away. The other day he said, I just made a flat top guitar. And I had to kind of poke my pencil in my ear and go, sorry, Stefan, I thought you said I've just made a flat top guitar. And he said, yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
You know, 40 years ago, he said, I'll never make a guitar. And then he made an archtop guitar, and then he made his, you know, stress top guitars, and now he made a flat top guitar. So who knows what he'll do next?
Well, exactly. Martin, it's been an absolute joy. We've come to the end of this session. I'm going to be coming up, hopefully, to see you and your collection on behalf of Guitar.com and the Guitar Magazine, and interviewing you thoroughly again.
Well, good. Can I just say?
Yeah, please do.
This last weekend, I had a guitar workshop, which was really, really successful. It sold out. It was an online workshop. And there were quite a number of people who wanted to do that workshop and couldn't get on because I wanted to keep the numbers,
sure,
you know, workable. So I'm doing another one on December the 5th.
Wonderful.
So if anybody is interested in coming to a guitar workshop, it's Saturday, December the 5th. It starts at 10 in the morning and it runs till 5 in the afternoon with sensible breaks so that people, including me, don't go. So,
oh, wonderful.
If anybody would like to join in with that, it's good.
Absolutely right. And the information is available through your website, I take it?
It is through the website, martinsimpson.com, yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, not just for this evening, Martin. Thank you for the music and the inspiration and the joy that you've brought to this scene for decades. It's been an absolute privilege to spend time with you. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's been a real pleasure.